but we have waited to have a more equal and balanced pipeline, and it's worked, and the team are thriving, and all of a sudden 1 becomes 2, becomes 3, becomes 4, and the company is thriving because of it, because of all these different perspectives, all these different lived experiences.
My name is Katharina, and I'm the Community and Event Manager at eCulture, a company that is on a mission to shape the world of unbiased hiring. Welcome to the Oops, I'm Biased podcast. In today's episode of the Oops, I'm Biased podcast, I am speaking to Glenn Ferguson from Catawiki. This Talent Leader Series episode has been quite a few weeks in the making. I would want to say months as well. We've met initially at the Breaking Bias Summit in 2023. I've been in touch ever since, and I finally got him on the podcast. He accepted our invitation. He is the DE&I lead and recruitment manager, so he has a dual role at Catawiki. That is also why I really wanted him to be featured on the Talent Leader Series. He has a lot to share when it comes to DE&I recruitment. You'll see in our conversation in just a little bit how much he actually has to share in terms of best practices and advice. We're going to talk mainly about internal change management, sort of how can you, as a recruiter, empower yourself and maybe also empower your colleagues to be advocates of an unbiased recruitment process and really strengthen that partnership with hiring managers. And then on the other hand, we're also talking a bit about, okay, how do you then make sure that you diversify your candidate pool, your shortlists, all those sorts of things. And he says he takes the opposite approach. I won't share too much. You'll have to listen to the entire episode to find out. And he also shares a lesson learned along the way. I think that could also be quite interesting for anyone listening. Now, without further ado, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I have the honor of welcoming Glenn Ferguson. We have been in conversation for quite a while. I'm really happy that we can make this happen today. I am having him on the Talent Leader Series. As you probably know, if you're an avid listener, we do these quite often for recruiters to share their best practices. Today is no different, but I won't give too much of an introduction to Glenn himself. He can do that much better than I can. Really looking forward to the conversation. Welcome, Glenn. It is so great to have you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, really nice to be here. I've been following all these podcasts for a little while now, and I'm a big fan of eCulture. So I'm super pleased and honored to be here today myself.
Great. Could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your connection to recruitment, and then also how your profession now links to DE&I?
Yeah, sure. Bit of a story. So, hi, I'm Glenn. I'm the recruitment manager at Catawiki for all business recruitment. So that is everything non-tech. I'm also the DE&I lead there, so I have a co-role, so managing all of our DE&I programs, ERG rollouts, community initiatives, inclusion trainings, bias trainings, all those kinds of encompassing things as well at Catawiki. So, I have the pleasure of basically being in a dual role, which I think recruitment is super powerful to be in that position, because we're dealing with everything that happens before an employee enters the space. So from a diversity perspective, super awesome. And if we can also look after the employee journey from an inclusion perspective, then why not? So that's basically my joint role. I'm originally from Australia. I grew up in a very small country town, 2.5 hours north of Melbourne. Quite isolated, quite rural. All the boys in school were playing soccer, and I was in tutus, like dancing in a ballet studio. So I was pretty different. And maybe I was picked on because of that. Maybe I didn't find myself any role models because of that. So the idea of role modeling, mentoring, seeing yourself in the direction that you want to go, representation, all those things are really important to me personally, and also professionally. So I think from an inherent sense of just wanting everyone to get along and just being treated equally, both personally and professionally, that's how I kind of landed in this space.
I think then you would be the perfect person to ask this next question that I ask any of my guests, but I think you're going to be particularly equipped since you have that dual role of D&I lead and then also recruitment manager. What does unbiased or inclusive recruitment then mean to you, and how does that sort of translate into your day-to-day work?
Yeah, I would say having a good feeling about an interview process going into the process, thinking they've taken steps to make sure that bias is eliminated as much as possible. It's going to be fair. People are asking structured questions. I'm given no special treatment, nor is anyone else. I think all the landmarks and milestones of a structured, unbiased recruitment process, having comfortability in that and knowing that whatever the outcome, I've been treated fairly, just the same as everybody else, and my skills will be present, and I'm being tested on that, and may the best person win, basically, I'd say is what that means to me.
Yeah, so basing recruitment process and decisions then on merit instead of sort of on the potential that they bring based on the skills that can be measured. How does the inclusion then play into that? Because I can imagine, well, unbiased is one part and then inclusive is another. How do you view that in recruitment then?
Yeah, I would say definitely there needs to be an element of inclusion in an unbiased interview process for sure. So I think it depends on the circumstance, but also, understanding people have different needs and catering to those needs as well. So like there's not one without the other. As I just said, everyone's treated exactly the same. I think there also needs to be exceptions made for people to ensure that the process is inclusive. So if you have difficulty reading, or if you're hearing impaired, or maybe you have learning difficulties, or there's something that needs to be tweaked in order to level that playing field. The idea of a level playing field doesn't mean that everyone's treated the same. Actually, it means that some people need to be boosted up or given some extra help in order to be shone a light on their skills and expertise in that way. So, I think also being aware and asking the right questions, making sure that it's a safe space for candidates to self-identify and to be given, what the support they need to be able to shine in the interview process as well.
Yeah. What does that recruitment process, or as you say, sort of interview process as well as sort of anything from application to getting the offer look like at Catawiki? If you can share some things, and what does DE&I, what role does DE&I play in that then?
Yeah, I think two things. So I think you have process and you have commitment. So without commitment, the process is not pointless, but it's not as powerful and effective. And without process, the commitment isn't as powerful or as effective as well. So I think it works in two ways. When I talk about commitment, I mean a commitment from the hiring managers and from the business to host an inclusive, unbiased interview process, to put their hand up for equity and inclusion and also diversity, and to say, no, I have a team of 9 of the same type of people. I want one of this other type of person in my team because it's not fair, it's not inclusive, it's not a dynamic work environment. We're all a bit of an echo chamber, right? So I think without that commitment, no matter what you do in the process and in the structured interview process and the way all the structure and milestones that you bring to make sure it is a fair and equitable process, it's not going to be as effective. So I talk about a commitment first, and then obviously the process. For Catawiki, that's become quite strict and quite structured in a way. So everything from the intake, from structured question sets, from naming competencies and ensuring that interviewers are testing on those competencies, to diverse interview panels, to hosting debriefs for everything, no matter what the outcome is, to make sure everyone's given a fair go. I think there's so many things that you can bring into your interview process in a structured way that's designed to minimize bias. And to be as inclusive as possible, because if you see yourself represented in the interview panel, immediately you have a connection there, and people are thinking from different perspectives and different angles. So that's basically how it works at Catawiki. We get a commitment up front. We have intake meetings. We follow a structured hiring process. Everything is done in the same manner, regardless if you're internal, if you're a referral, if you're an external applicant, to ensure there's as much fairness as possible.
Yeah, and that can be so hard, I think, getting the commitment upfront from everyone, because I can imagine that, especially if you talk about sort of internal mobility or referrals, that then it might be quite difficult to get them on board and say, no, but we need to follow the protocol. We have a process and a structure, and everyone should be treated fairly and in the same way. I think one of the biggest prerequisites then for that is to do that sort of internal change management to get the hiring managers on board. I think what we initially discussed in sort of our introduction meetings, that you feel very passionate about equipping recruiters to do that work and to also sort of make hiring managers also advocates of an unbiased and inclusive recruitment through that. Walk me through why that is so important to you to empower recruiters to be advocates there, and how that actually comes to be then at Catawiki.
Yeah, I think every hiring manager has the business in mind because they're from their own section of the business. There's an open seat on their team. They're not as productive. They're not making as much money. Whatever it is, they have an inherent sense of, I need to close this role. And that's understandable because that's just the nature of being a hiring manager. So I think it's up to the recruiter to take a step back and be like, okay, this is the process. This is how we do things. What do you want in the process? We can leave it. We can close it really fast, but is that really going to be the best person for your team long term? So kind of be, I guess, a strategic business partner, partner up with the business, help them see more long term, and get an investment for diversity from the get-go. I can say that probably where the business was at 4 years ago, we weren't ready to have these types of conversations, but in equipping ourselves with knowledge, in the way the political scene and the world has moved, has also enabled us to have these more in-depth conversations and to be more advocates of diversity. It's becoming more a part of the vernacular. It's becoming regular to speak about these things. And slowly but surely, all of a sudden, I have an army of hiring managers who are really invested in diversity, are happy to hold or wait a little bit to have a more diverse candidate, rather than just to rush through a process. So I think it's all about that commitment, and it's all about TA advocating for that, because it's very easy to say, oh, no, you're right, let's fill the role quick, I've got a few people, let's just push them through and expedite the process, and we'll hire them and they can start in a couple of weeks, right? It's so easy to do that. It's easy for us because we think, oh great, I don't have to deal with this hiring manager anymore. It's easy for the business to think, oh great, someone's sitting in the role now. Everything is pointing in the direction to expedite, manage a quick process, get someone in the seat and just keep running. So I think that really, we as recruitment, as TA, need to stand out and say, actually, we had a plan. This is the plan. Let's stick to the plan. And it's going to be better for the business long term. It's going to be better for the team long term. And we get a better, more inclusive and diverse outcome.
Yeah. It's admirable that you got to that point, because I think lots of recruiters, as you were just describing, I was smiling because I hear that a lot, that recruiters say, well, we're under such a time crunch all the time to fill those roles and to sort of toss the ball to the hiring manager, who then picks it up, and then they just keep running. What would you then advise those recruiters who say, well, I have absolutely no time. I might be passionate about making our recruitment process more inclusive and also getting hiring managers on board. How do I sort of take that first 1 or 2 steps in getting my team even on board? Because, well, most teams, as you might also have a team that you're managing of recruiters who do the operational work. Where do you get started then?
Yeah, good question. I think it's about prioritization always. Whenever someone's overwhelmed or they have too much on their plate, it becomes about prioritization. So what are the number one roles? What can wait? And it is always a question, can I wait for diversity? Is it feasible? Are the wheels falling off? Is the whole company going to close tomorrow? It's pointless what you do in that space if by waiting and not filling the role, really, the walls are going to fall off and no one has a company to work for tomorrow. So that question does need to be asked. But 9 times out of 10, I think it can wait just a week, just a couple of days. It doesn't seem like so much when you put it into perspective. But I would say, ruthlessly prioritize I'd just say prioritization, actually. It's usually a case that you can do that and that you can take some pressure or workload off yourself, or someone else can step in if you're feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think lots of the pressure that we're feeling is sort of, well, I don't want to call it fabricated, but it's amplified by lots of external pressures that might just come out of an individual's feeling of pressure, sort of passing it on. If you can be the one to say, well, let's stop here. Let's see, can we buy ourselves a week to figure out, to do this process better, or sort of source better, or wait for more applicants to come in, as it were, in this example. That can go a long way.
I think also when you zoom out and zoom in, you can really actually see perspective. So it's not just about prioritizing your own workload, because that's still looking within yourself. When you zoom out and look at the business in a broader context, maybe you speak to your manager, or you speak to a head of or a VP or even C-level to understand what is going on in the business. When you have that overview, it can make your problems or what you're dealing with seem a little smaller, and then you're able to kind of reprioritize and shift, I would say. So that can also help sometimes.
Yeah, you talked earlier a little bit about educating yourself and your team to become those advocates for creating more unbiased and inclusive processes. What exactly are you talking about when you say, well, we're educating ourselves? Where are you going? Sort of, maybe listeners would like to know what resources do I have that might also be for free or might be paid that I can approach to become a better advocate, and to also have these hard conversations with hiring managers and come out successful in a way to sort of strengthen that partnership.
Yeah, definitely. McKinsey do a lot of great articles backed by a lot of great data and a lot of great studies. I usually look at anything that's on their HR boards. Harvard Business Review are also great. And then there are loads of conferences to attend, like things like the Breaking Bias, I think, is coming up again, or has just been. Tech Leap do great stuff. Equals in Amsterdam do great stuff. The D2 Collective do great stuff. There's so many events and places that you can go to enrich yourself with knowledge. A lot of it's free. Listening to podcasts, just doing a Google and finding some studies on these things can really help. And once you kind of pad yourself up and surround yourself with enough of this knowledge and enough of these examples, it makes it easier to go back to the business. But then I would say the most powerful thing is looking at examples of when it's worked in the past from your own company and your own experience. I have 3, 4, 5 examples now of when we've waited for the right candidate. We've made a decision to specifically hire for diversity. That doesn't mean we're changing a process or that person got the job just because they're a diverse hire. It means that we were tested and assessed against exactly the same things. So they've gotten the job because they are the best person for the job. But we have waited to have a more equal and balanced pipeline. And it's worked, and the team are thriving, and all of a sudden 1 becomes 2, becomes 3, becomes 4, and the company is thriving because of it, because of all these different perspectives, all these different lived experiences. You can just see the way it changes the team and changes their mindset and mentality, which in the end changes the product for the customer, because we're a much more well-rounded, well thought through product. So you can arm yourself with as much knowledge from external things as possible just to get the conversation going. But once you start having your own examples, incredibly powerful.
Yeah, that's a wonderful sort of 1-2 step process as well, to say, well, first go out and educate yourself. Maybe also find that community of fellow recruiters who do the same thing, who might be a bit further along in the journey, as you mentioned, conferences, attending those, hearing sort of use cases out there, or talking to people who are also attending. I think that's also a wonderful way of educating yourself. That is, well, conferences are not free, but sort of semi-free, because you keep those relationships going, learning from each other.
Yeah, conferences might not be, but meetups certainly are.
Indeed.
A lot of companies also do meetups, which is peer-to-peer learning is incredible. It's one of my favorite things.
Yeah, and then also a plethora of research out there and resources from the different sources that you just mentioned. I think are just great. I'll probably put some of those examples in our show notes, so you can just go ahead and click on those. Maybe you also have an article that is a favorite of yours that you've shared with hiring managers. We've also done, I want to say, a year and a half ago, maybe, we've done a webinar with Glenn Ferguson from Hexaware Technologies on building a business case for DE&I. So that might also be something to check out, sort of figuring out, okay, how can you approach hiring managers, or sort of the business in general, with the benefits of diversity, and sort of making your process more inclusive towards that. So that might also be a resource that is free out there from us. You already alluded to your second sort of strong point that we discussed in the introduction around what have you found that really works when it comes to diversifying your applicant pool and your shortlist. Can you walk us through what you do? Because I found it quite interesting. You say you take the opposite approach. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, definitely. I think often recruitment functions or TA functions are run a little bit like sales. Like we have pipelines, we have conversions. We're all looking to kind of maximize our time efficiency and speak to as little people as possible. That's going to equal a deal, and then it's done, right? And to a certain point, I agree with that, especially if you're insanely busy and you need to make sure that the arrow you shoot is going to land and hit the goal, for sure. But what I find much more interesting, if you can spend the time, is spend more time speaking to more diverse, more interesting, out-of-the-box candidates. If you've had a proper conversation with your hiring manager about what are the skills and competencies for this job, what are you actually looking for, what will make someone successful in this role, what are the skills gaps, all of a sudden you look at CVs in an entirely different way. You're thinking much more from a skills and competency base, and a lot of that is not testable by just looking at a CV. So by opening, I encourage all my recruiters to open and expand the people that they speak with more people than you classically would. And you might end up with a much more interesting and better result because you've already laid the ground roots with your hiring manager on skills and competencies. You've looked at the CVs from a skills and competency perspective and thinking much more holistically about someone's profile. You're then typing up notes and then putting that forward to the hiring manager. So they're reading and absorbing your vision and your notes for this candidate and why it might fit and why it might work. By the time they've spoken to the candidate, their minds and perspectives are going to be much more open than just from looking at a CV thinking, oh, this person doesn't have exactly what I'm looking for. Because you'd be surprised if you ask pretty much anyone what is the most important thing for this role, it's usually attitude, commitment, a sense of rolling your sleeves up, getting your hands dirty, getting your work done. All of that stuff doesn't come from a perfect CV, right? So I think really trying to start those conversations and cast the net broad, spend time, invest time in speaking to much more people than what you actually would if you have the time, because it is exhausting. But I think that's a business case for diversity. I think it's a business case for equipping your TA teams with enough people to have those types of conversations, because we are the filters, and I want the filters to be a little bit wider than what they normally would be.
Yeah, it is definitely sort of, as you say, taking the opposite approach, a bit of an unusual process, as you say, with recruitment being run almost like a sales process, as you say, sort of really focusing on, well, can we push them through the funnel as quickly as possible. What you just mentioned is such a wonderful example of making the process more inclusive, as you first explained. Sort of giving equal chances also means putting pedestals up for people who might not have had the privilege of showing a CV that has no gaps and sort of has all of the bells and whistles that you would like, or a hiring manager would like to see. It's a wonderful example of sort of looking deeper into, well, what did you actually do in those roles? What skills and behaviors actually demonstrating in those roles, much more important than what the title of the role was or what the company was that you worked for. It's really nice that you sort of also outline a bit of a sort of an introductory step to letting go of only looking at those titles and shiny things on CVs and sort of focusing on, let's look at the CV through the lens of skills and competencies acquired, translating that to a hiring manager. I think those are wonderful tips. Is there anything else that I missed there?
No, it's a really nice summary. But I do think that people usually mirror or reflect back the types of language that you give to them. So if from the very beginning you're talking about skills and competencies, if you're asking a question like, what do you need for this job? And that question doesn't involve, I want this XYZ experience from these companies, then if you craft and frame your notes in that way, because you've had that conversation, that's what they're expecting, then it just allows for a much more open-minded conversation later on about these candidates. And if all of a sudden they think, oh, actually, I've missed something, I really need this, then okay, I'll put that in as well as part of my notes so that they get a whole rounded picture. But yeah, I really think it's about the language you use and that they reflect back and how you speak about a role and opening.
Yeah. Just to give a bit of a ballpark in terms of when you say you need to speak to more people that you normally would, or sort of spend more time on that process of either sourcing or just scanning through who could be a good fit, not based on just their CV but also their competencies. What would that entail in terms of time investment, and what are you getting back then?
Yeah. True. It's going to be different for each role because pipelines are different for each role. Like you could get 100 applicants, you could get 50, you could get 10. It is quite different. From a classic process I ran a couple of weeks ago, I still also recruit with my team as well. We had quite a healthy pipeline, like hundreds of applicants, for example. I think I narrowed that down to about 30, and I spoke with 20 of them, which was a lot of time over a couple of weeks. Classically, maybe I'd only speak to between 8 or 12, I guess, of those, but I consciously spoke to more. We were also looking for a diverse outcome for this hire. So, that's kind of how I'd envision it. I understand not everyone has time to speak to that amount of people. But if you do, and if you're a recruiter for a reason and you like speaking to people, hopefully it doesn't take away too much energy from you, because I also think we're in the job for a reason, right? Like, we enjoy speaking to people. It's fun. I could do it all day, every day. I've never had a role in a business ever where I've been so happy in a corporate setting, because I come from a non-traditional background as well. That's what I did, and that's kind of what I'd suggest.
Yeah, it's a good ballpark to know, okay, what's feasible as well, and what can you get out of it. I think that's always important as well. If, say, a recruiter's listening who might not have all of the decision-making power and how much time they spend on a certain role, but it might be a good sort of ballpark to say, well, let me just spend a few more hours on this and see what the outcome might be, instead of my normal time that I get given or range that I have.
Or even if a recruiter screen or a recruiter interview goes for half an hour, then maybe just invest 2 more hours in that, so 4 more. Or say I'm going to speak to 10% or 20% more than I usually would. That's relatively small, but it has a big impact.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice. I'm going to ask you about best practices at the end again, because I think you might have a short list of things that people can potentially start this afternoon already. My second to last question for you would be around situations or mistakes that you've learned, or lessons that you've learned along the way when it comes to recruitment with a lens on DE&I.
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually my answer is an obscure one. It's actually patience. Just because you got to know the first time doesn't mean that change isn't happening in the back of people's minds, that the second time you ask, they might be more likely to choose for diversity. I would say the world is a much different place 4 years ago than to what it is today. And I could never have imagined doing the things that I'm doing now, and having the type of engagement, and having my hiring managers on board and acting in the way that they're acting for the better 4 years ago than what it would be today. So I'd say don't give up, persistence, patience, ask again, and eventually, hopefully, the right outcome will prevail. Because I really could not think that I'd be in the position that I'm in today 4 years ago, I would say. Yeah.
That's great advice. I think with the business world turning so fast, we're always sort of on to the next. Patience might be a virtue in that way. Now, some best practices that you might want to share with our listeners who might be fellow recruiters, who want to start with 1 or 2 steps in the right direction. Anything that you have to share that could be helpful for them.
Yeah, definitely. Aside from all the stuff we've spoken about with regards to like language that you use, running an intake, getting a commitment for diversity, etc., because I think that has a massive impact. It's where we have the most amount of impact as recruiters and as talent acquisition professionals. Aside from that, a few structural things that you can do and that I've noticed make a huge difference is definitely structured interview question sets. If you know the type of conversation you're going into, regardless of who you're speaking with, or letting kind of any personal afflictions or shared experiences kind of guide that conversation, that's a huge one. Just narrowing down what are the questions. So often I'll sit in an intake meeting and be like, okay, so you're assessing this competency. Great. But what are the questions you're going to ask? Like, just dive a little bit deeper, ask them for specific examples, and then make sure that they're running a structured interview. Has a huge impact, I would say, and it's more work than what it sounds. I'm saying it now, but actually it's asking more questions, follow-up questions, creating a separate doc with extra questions in it, and kind of ensuring that the whole process that can be 3, 4, 5, 6 interviews long it's a lot of work. So don't underestimate that amount of work, and just continue to do that for each role. And if you're overwhelmed and you don't have time to do it, put your hand up, tell your manager, speak to your VP, because it's really important. And I think they'd agree that we're not just running random interviews basically, and kind of feeling the temperature and hoping that it sticks and hoping that it works. That'd be my number one. And it's hard, and you have to keep doing it, and it takes tenacity. So that's a big one, actually. And then in terms of actually increasing diversity and representation and getting the best out of your candidates, diverse interview panels. Make sure that the person hasn't just spoken to the same type of person the whole way through the process, or if there's a group of 3 people they're speaking with, there's someone else in there, there's a diverse perspective in there. Not only do they see themselves represented from an inclusion perspective and think, okay, this could be somewhere I can live, I can work here. Also, when they're debriefing and when they're feeding back and discussing amongst themselves, you'll have a different perspective to the table. So it can just really help get a more diverse outcome. So I'd say those 2 are my biggest tips. And aside from that, structure. I would say make sure try and bring as much structure as you can into the process, and commitment.
Yeah, those are really great best practices and tips that I think we hear a lot, but I also think it's important to repeat them, because, as you say, it's a lot of work. I'm sort of speaking to any recruiter listening who might have also listened to other talent leaders episodes from us. It's something that comes up again and again, but I think it's because it's so important that it comes up again and again. Those are structured interviews, those diverse interview panels. I think those 2 are just sort of the pillars of making your recruitment process less biased and then more inclusive.
And it's also really easy to slip. The minute it gets busy and you think, I don't have time to do that, it will slip. And just because I'm sitting here saying do all of this stuff doesn't mean that it happens every time for us either. No one's perfect. It can slip up if you're super busy. Like, it's just a continuous thing that you need to continuously remind yourself to do and keep doing, I would say.
Yeah. Glenn, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and having this conversation with me. I really enjoyed what we discussed. I also learned a lot from you. I'm going to write all of those resources down, share them in the show notes, also have a peek myself, because you can never learn enough. I hope you enjoyed our conversation as much as I did.
Yeah, I really did. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. It's my second podcast I've ever done. So hooray. I'm learning and growing myself. So it was really a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I am sure our audience as well learned a lot from you. If you have listened to us in the past, do check us out again in 2 weeks' time. We're a bi-weekly release podcast. Let us know what you thought of this episode. Connect with Glenn on LinkedIn. I'm sure he'll be happy to speak about more of these best practices if you have any remaining questions there. And if you are new to us, do make sure that you subscribe on Spotify or YouTube or Apple Podcasts. We're going to be back in 2 weeks, and I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.